October 14, 1943. Over Germany, 24,000 feet above the dark rooftops of Schweinfurt. Frost lined the inside of the cockpit windows. Oxygen masks hissed. The bombers of the 91st Bomb Group flew tight formations, four-engine giants carved from aluminum and nerve. Below them lay the largest ball-bearing factories in Europe, the steel heart of Hitler's war machine. And directly ahead, the sky began to boil. Luftwaffe spotters had seen the formation an hour earlier. They knew this wasn't just another raid. It was a full daylight penetration deep into the Reich, unescorted, hundreds of B-17s. But today, German pilots would discover something buried inside those formations, a secret upgrade, an invisible force that would shatter everything they thought they knew about American bombers. In the lead B-17, Lieutenant Jack Rayner adjusted the trim. His gloved fingers twitched against the control yoke. Below him, bomb bay doors remained sealed for now. Ahead, the flak bursts began, black flowers blooming in the stratosphere. But it wasn't the flak that had Rayner's stomach twisted. It was the sound. There was something wrong with the formation's engine rhythm. He'd flown over 20 missions, and he knew the hum of Wright Cyclone engines by heart. But this was different. It was faster. He checked his instruments, all normal, but the air around his fortress vibrated almost imperceptibly. A new tremor, not turbulence, not altitude sickness, something else, something alive. Behind the squadron, German interceptors banked into attack runs. And that's when everything changed. The moment the FW-190s dove into range, they expected the usual: slow turns, blind spots, gaps in coverage. A few gunners trying to fend off a dozen fighters. Instead, they flew into a storm of fire. Lieutenant Dieter Kerhler of Jagdschwader 3 barely had time to shout before his canopy lit up with red tracers. From above, below, from wings and bellies, the fortresses opened up with precision that felt inhuman. He broke right. His wingman was gone, not smoking, not trailing, gone. The formations didn't just shoot back. They anticipated, they calculated. Back inside Rayner's fortress, the top turret was already tracking a second fighter. Sergeant Lopez didn't need to swing his guns. The plane's onboard computer did it for him. That was the secret. Inside select fortresses, behind sealed compartments, was a piece of electronics the Germans had no word for. Not radar, not radio. But something that read the sky, calculated closing speeds, lead vectors, and automatically adjusted gunner aim. Every gunner in the formation now had the aiming accuracy of a man who had fired 1,000 perfect shots. They called it the Sperry predictive gun sight. The Germans never saw it coming. Rayner's tail gunner reported 2 kills in 30 seconds. "I didn't even think," he said. "The sight just locked on and I squeezed." They weren't just bombers anymore. They were flying fortresses with brains. By the time the formation reached Schweinfurt, over 60 German fighters had been shot down. Not by P-47 escorts, not by lucky gunners, but by machines wired with American engineering so advanced it seemed to cheat the laws of reaction time. Back at base, Luftwaffe intelligence was stunned. Recon photos showed unusually tight defensive fire, suggesting possible use of synchronized firing data. One analyst scoffed, "That's not possible in midair. They'd need computers in the sky." They did. They just didn't look like computers. They looked like bomb sights, gun sights, radio boxes. By the time the bombs dropped over Schweinfurt, the Germans realized the price. Hundreds of factories pounded into twisted steel, dozens of fighters lost. And still the fortresses came on. From the ground they looked no different, just endless silver insects in geometric formations, but inside they had evolved. Raynor looked out the cockpit window and saw a German fighter spiraling downward, smoking, trailing fire. He hadn't even seen who shot it. This was no longer the war he signed up for in '42. This was something new. When they landed in England, ground crews swarmed the surviving B-17s. Most had damage. Some were limping on 2 engines, but the gunners were wide-eyed. "You should have seen it," one said. "It was like the plane knew before I did." Word spread fast, too fast. The Office of Strategic Services ordered blackout silence. The upgrades couldn't be mentioned in letters, reports, or even flight logs. Because the secret wasn't just the gun sights, it was what came next. The first integration of real-time fire control, computing into an airborne gun platform. A prototype system the Germans had nothing to match. And it worked. Not because it fired faster. Because it fired smarter. 2 weeks later, Luftwaffe Command issued new orders. Avoid direct frontal attacks on B-17 formations suspected of carrying Sperry-class predictive fire control modules. But by then, it was already too late. Because another formation was already on its way, and this time they weren't just testing, they were deploying. And in their bellies, packed next to 500-pound bombs, was something the Germans hadn't even dared imagine: automated tracking linked to synchronized formation AI. The fortresses weren't evolving to defend themselves. They were evolving to think. 2 weeks later, the fog over East Anglia hung low and wet, swallowing the runways of RAF Bassingbourn in a gray silence. Ground crews moved in silence too, their hands numb, their uniforms soaked. But what they loaded into the bellies of the B-17s that morning was not ordinary ordnance. Inside the forward fuselage of Raynor's new aircraft, now assigned to a fresh crew, a fresh target, technicians sealed a small steel housing the size of a field radio. It had no label, no serial, just a matte black panel and a pair of indicator lights. One green, one red. Nobody spoke about it, they didn't have to. The gunners just nodded. They'd flown the Schweinfurt mission. They remembered what it felt like when their bullets hit first. What they didn't know was that this version, the one being loaded now, had been reprogrammed. The first Sperry predictive sight was a revolution. It adjusted for lead and drift. But this one accounted for friendly formation drift, cloud cover refraction, ammunition type, and something else entirely: frequency mapping of enemy interception patterns. It learned. Raynor didn't know the math. He didn't have to. He just knew what the engineers had whispered over coffee in the hangar 2 nights ago. They ran the whole Stuttgart engagement through it. "You mean like a simulation?" "No, I mean it knows what the Luftwaffe did last time, and it's waiting for them to do it again." The mission was Frankfurt. 150 bombers, no escorts until deep inland. The gamble was the same: bring the fight to the Reichskorps and survive long enough for long-range Thunderbolts to link up on exfil. But this time, the gamble was backed by something else. The sky above the channel was clear and quiet, the way it always was in the first hour. Engines hummed, radios chirped. The formation tightened, boxes locking into place. Raynor adjusted altitude, checked his compass, glanced once at the black box mounted just behind the navigator's station. Still green. At 24,000 feet, they passed the Rhine, and then it started again. First came the flak, rhythmic, predictable black holes punched into the sky. Then came the first interceptors. 2 dozen Bf-109s and FW-190s swarmed in from cloud cover. They de-learned not to attack head-on. Not after Schweinfurt. This time they came in fast from the sides, attempting to shear off the lead bombers with cannon bursts and disappear before the gunners could coordinate. But they didn't make it through the first pass. The guns opened not just early but together. Top turrets, waist gunners, tail gunners, They moved in uncanny unison, firing with a confidence that startled even their own crews. Rayner's tail gunner, Corporal Jennings, swore into the intercom. It's like they knew where he'd be before he turned. A fighter dove in from port. The left waist gunner tracked without flinching. His gun barked once, twice. The FW-190 disintegrated mid-roll. Jennings laughed, not from joy but disbelief. I wasn't even touching my compensator dial. It adjusted on its own. The German pilots had expected chaos. They found choreography. 1, 2, 3 fighters fell. The rest pulled away, climbing, reforming. They had trained against fortresses. They had not trained against these. By the time the formation reached Frankfurt, the sky behind them was littered with wreckage, and they hadn't even opened the bomb bay doors yet. Back at Luftwaffe High Command, the radio intercepts told a story that no one wanted to read. Units from Jagdschwader 26 had suffered catastrophic losses again. Only this time they couldn't explain it away with pilot fatigue or weather or aggressive maneuvers. Something was different. The bomber gunners were too fast, too coordinated, too accurate. The next morning, a report landed on the desk of Oberstleutnant Gerhard Rossmann. It contained recovered gun camera footage from one surviving FW-190. In frame, 4 B-17s in close formation, guns firing in sequence, tracking a single fighter as if wired into one another. Rossmann rewound the footage 6 times. Same thing. No lag, no overshoot, no panic firing. The gunners weren't reacting, they were anticipating. He called his aide. What would it take to coordinate 4 aircraft's defensive fire in perfect timing? The aide blinked, without radio comms, without delay. Exactly. Sir, it would take calculation, pre-coordination, a centralized system. Rossmann leaned back. You mean they're flying as one gunship? No, sir, the aide said almost to himself. They're flying as one organism. By the end of October, rumors spread in Luftwaffe-ready rooms. The B-17s had eyes now. Some said radar. Others said AI, though they didn't have the word yet. All they knew was that something about American bomber formations had changed. And it was costing them planes and men. In England, the 8th Air Force saw the trend too. After integrating the Sperry fire control systems in 24 fortresses, gunner-kill ratios had nearly doubled, not because of better ammo, not because of better pilots, but because the machine aimed faster than human reflexes could. And that was just the beginning. The next upgrade wasn't mechanical, it was strategic. Engineers realized they could use synchronized timing from multiple Sperry units to triangulate threats. The result, predictive gunnery that didn't just aim, it anticipated formation-wide enemy vectors. If a German fighter was targeting the lead bomber, tail gunners from the entire rear element would track it before it reached range. They called it ghost netting, not officially, not in any document, but among the crews the name stuck. It felt like the fortresses were seeing ghosts, threats just over the horizon, and answering them before they appeared. Rayner's next mission, over Kassel, proved it beyond doubt. They were engaged at 27,000 feet south of the primary target. 5 German interceptors in staggered formation dove from cloud cover. Every gunner who saw them thought the same thing. No way we respond in time. But the guns were already moving. Across 5 fortresses, the top turrets turned in sync. The Sperry units pinged off one another silently, no radio, and adjusted. The moment the Germans opened fire, they were answered by a blizzard of .50 caliber rounds from a formation that reacted as one. Only one fighter broke through. It never made a second pass. Rayner watched the whole thing from his cockpit, breath fogging the mask. They're not fighting us anymore, he muttered. They're fighting the math. Inside the belly of his fortress, the green light on the Sperry module pulsed once, then twice. Behind enemy lines, in briefing rooms in Münster and Berlin, the panic began to build. What had been a war of attrition, where the Luftwaffe could always count on thinning out the American bombers, was now changing. Because the bombers weren't just defending themselves. They were learning. And Germany had nothing to match them. By late November, the Germans had changed their tactics again. No more head-on attacks, no more straight dives, no more probing formations like they had for the past 2 years. The Luftwaffe had learned through blood that the old methods no longer worked. Instead, they shifted to swarm strikes. 10, 15, even 20 fighters diving in from multiple quadrants at once. A chaos storm designed to overwhelm the gunners, to break the algorithms that had begun anticipating every maneuver. But even chaos had patterns, and the new Sperry units, nicknamed the Mine by some American crews, had begun learning those too. The bombers didn't just react faster now, they adapted. By the 3rd week of the month, Major Wilhelm Voss, a highly decorated Luftwaffe ace with 72 confirmed kills, was called into a confidential briefing in Wiesbaden. The officer in charge didn't mince words. "They're fighting differently," the colonel said, lighting a cigarette. "This is not like 43. They see you coming. They fire before you line up. Their formations tighten at the exact second you enter the zone. We've seen gunners in planes 200 meters away firing at the same target from different angles. Synchronized." Voss raised an eyebrow. "You're suggesting they're linked?" The colonel exhaled. "We don't know what to call it, but they're not guessing anymore. They're thinking together." Voss said nothing, but deep in his stomach, something cold began to settle. 3 days later, he saw it for himself. It was a raid on Bremen, midday. The skies were clean, visibility clear, and the Americans were flying in layered combat boxes. Perfect conditions for a kill. Voss flew in with a wing of FW-190s. Their objective was to isolate the tail of the 2nd Squadron and break its line. He came in at a shallow angle, cannon armed, speed at maximum. Then it happened. 5 seconds before he entered range, the rear fortresses shifted. 2 moved slightly apart, exposing the tail guns with optimal fields of fire. At the same time, the right waist gunners on 3 planes swiveled not just toward Voss's squadron, but toward a position Voss hadn't reached yet. He pulled left instinctively, confused. They were already leading him, not his current position, his future one. The first round struck his wingman. The fighter burst into flames without ever firing a shot. The next aircraft behind him veered up in panic, caught another spray of coordinated fire, and spiraled out of view. Voss disengaged, fast. Even as he dove away, tracers stitched past his canopy. They weren't shooting at where he was. They were shooting at where he was going to be. He landed 2 hours later with a damaged rudder and no kills. His crew chief said nothing. The ground crews said nothing. But the silence told him everything. This wasn't air superiority. This was technological collapse. What haunted him wasn't just the accuracy. It was the timing. The behavior of the fortresses. They didn't seem like a formation of separate planes anymore. They behaved like one body, a single organism with dozens of eyes and dozens of arms. And worse, the more pressure he applied, the faster it seemed to learn. In England, the men who built the system were watching that very data. At a nondescript lab near Duxford, engineers pored over reel after reel of gunnery film and analog telemetry. The results were shocking, even to them. Kill ratios had shifted. On average, B-17 gunners equipped with Sperry-linked fire control modules were scoring 3 times the hits of their non-equipped counterparts. More than that, they were sharing angles of fire without any radio coordination. One gunnery sergeant described it in his debrief like this: "I didn't see the enemy at first. Then suddenly my guns started to shift. I thought the mount was jammed, but I trusted it, fired, hit dead center. 10 seconds later, the guy in the top turret says he got the same one, different angle. The engineers ran the math. The system had begun factoring in the formation's geometry, adjusting not just for its own aircraft's angle, but for the location and timing of gunners 2 ships over. There was no code word for this, no doctrine. They hadn't created a targeting system. They'd created distributed cognition. And the Germans were seeing it firsthand. Over Berlin, the first signs of Luftwaffe fatigue began to show. The pilots weren't just losing, they were pulling off, leaving formations untouched, skimming the edge of bomber wings and firing blind just to maintain appearances. They weren't trying to win, they were trying to survive. In one intercepted radio call, a German pilot shouted to ground control, "They don't shoot like men anymore." That line made it all the way to the War Department. It was printed, redacted, circulated. And still they didn't publish anything about the system, not to the press, not even to most Allied partners. It had to remain invisible. Because if the Germans knew how it worked, that it was modular, swappable, and fast to replicate, they'd change their patterns again. But the system was already spreading. By January 1944, nearly half of all 8th Air Force B-17s carried some version of the fire control module. They were tested in formations, compared in action, refined week by week. Each mission improved the next. Each kill taught the system how to find the next one faster. Gunners joked that the Sperry wasn't a tool, it was a passenger, a ghost sitting in the plane, whispering where to aim. And like all ghosts, it never slept. One pilot described the feeling on the intercom during a February raid over Hanover. "We took hits. Number 3 engine caught fire. We dropped out of the main line, alone. I thought we were dead. And then the guns started moving on their own, slow at first, then faster. The tail gunner got 2 kills in 30 seconds. He said afterward, I didn't aim. I just pulled the trigger when it turned." That fortress made it back, barely. The waist gunners were injured, the bombardier was dead, but the pilot wrote in his log, "Saved by the ghost." Back in Germany, the intelligence officers were out of answers. They called in radar experts, mathematicians, even cryptographers. They tore apart wrecked bombers looking for evidence of radio-controlled gun turrets, of pilotless weapon systems. They never found a thing. The systems self-destructed when pierced, melting their circuits with magnesium charge blocks. Every critical module was rigged to burn itself before recovery. In one wreckage outside Cologne, a Luftwaffe recovery team pulled a Sperry unit from a destroyed bomber. It was partially intact until they touched the housing. A silent puff of smoke, then nothing. No wires, no circuits, just ash. The only thing left was a printed label on the housing lid. Property of War Department, remove only with authorization. The Germans knew then. They weren't fighting an air force anymore. They were fighting a system. One that didn't bleed, didn't sleep, and with every mission got smarter. By March 1944, the Luftwaffe wasn't hunting anymore. It was retreating. What once had been a proud war machine, the Iron Eagles of the Reich, feared across the skies of Europe, had turned into something else entirely. A reaction force, scrambling, bleeding, improvising. German command had issued directives: conserve fuel, protect trained pilots, delay contact until the target zone. But the Americans no longer needed to be baited into traps. They came in waves. Broad daylight, deep penetrations, and in their bellies flew not just bombs, but intelligence. Every gun camera, every fire control unit, every returning Sperry module sent back more data than the previous one. It was cataloged, processed, punched into IBM machines in makeshift labs near Cambridge and Cheltenham. Out of those machines came numbers, firing arcs, interception timing, optimal defensive angles, and from those numbers came code. The code was printed onto tape, rolled into modules and flown back across the channel. What came out of this loop wasn't just a smarter gunner. It was a self-improving swarm. Rayner felt it on every mission now. His fortress flew smoother, his gunners aimed tighter. Not because they were veterans, many weren't, but because the plane itself had learned. One of his waist gunners was 19, had never fired a shot in anger before his first flight. Scored his first confirmed kill over the Ardennes, didn't miss. When asked how he did it, he just shrugged. The guns were already there, I just pulled. The aircrews were no longer the limit, the machines were. And the machines were getting faster. By April, they deployed MK-III units. The modules weren't just reactive, they simulated. Onboard processors built virtual scenarios mid-flight, adjusting for crosswind, air density, and even formation damage. If a wingman fell, the fire net shifted automatically, covering the new angle within milliseconds. Rayner saw it happen over Stuttgart. A fortress beside him lost its left engine, began to slide out of formation. In the past, that would have opened a gap. Not this time. 3 other bombers adjusted without radio, drifting tighter. The gunners shifted fields of fire. The hole was gone before the Germans reached them. In one flight, they had outmaneuvered failure itself. Luftwaffe analysts were losing their minds. Intercepted chatter from JG-11 pilots described the fortresses as living iron. Others called them sky tanks. But the term that kept repeating, even in official reports, was Schwarmgeist. Swarm spirit. A bomber formation with one mind. Voss watched his own squadrons begin to crack. He heard it in the strained voices of new pilots. They see us before we see them. They don't react like men. They never miss. His own kill rate had dropped by half, and he was one of the best they had. He met with command in May, presented his findings, suggested new tactics, flak corridors, radar jamming, targeted disinformation, anything to disrupt the system. The generals nodded, agreed, promised resources, then quietly told him what he feared most. The Reich could not match the Americans. Not in pilots, not in fuel, and certainly not in machines. Every B-17 shot down cost the Americans a crew, yes, but they had more factories, more aluminum, more young men, and now more intelligence. For every bomber that fell, 2 came back smarter. And for every gunner that fired, 1,000 lines of flight data were recorded. The Americans had built a war machine that didn't just produce weapons. It produced adaptation. That spring, the fortresses began flying deeper than ever before. Munich, Regensburg, even the Austrian oil fields. And the Germans no longer knew where to hit them. Their radar was jammed. Their squadrons too depleted to coordinate en masse. The only option left was to attack in desperation, scatter shot, one-man intercepts, kamikaze dives without precision. Rayner called them ghost attacks. Because the fighters came alone, and they died alone. He saw one FW-190 fly straight through the center of the formation, never fired, just spiraled into a bomber wing and exploded. The fortress survived. Lost a turret, lost an aileron, but stayed in formation. The other ships shifted instantly, rebalancing coverage. As if nothing had happened. Rayner asked his engineer afterward, "How the hell did we hold together?" The man tapped the black box in the nose. She knew what to do. The system wasn't just defensive now, it was instinctive. And the final piece, the one that made it unstoppable, came in June. Aerial relays. Each module now included a short-range burst transmitter. High frequency, low power, encrypted. The fortresses weren't just calculating individually. They were talking to each other. Quietly, silently, mid-flight. From that point on, the sky over Europe changed forever. Because the Americans no longer flew in formations. They flew as a network, a hive, and the Luftwaffe never recovered. In the last week of July 1944, the sky above Leipzig glowed silver. Not from the sun, not from the clouds, but from a wall of B-17s that stretched across the horizon in every direction. From the ground it looked like a mirage. Some farmers wept, some prayed. The old men, veterans of the last war, took off their hats. They had never seen machines like this, not in these numbers. The formation wasn't flying. It was crawling across the air like a continent of steel. The Luftwaffe scrambled everything it had. What few fighters remained, a ragged collection of Me-109s, Focke-Wulfs, even a few obsolete Bf-110, were thrown into the air like stones hurled at a tsunami. Voss flew with them. He had 89 kills by then. He flew with the desperate belief that one clean pass might be enough to disrupt them. It was. As he approached the lead element, he saw something that made his gut go cold. The formation shifted. Not the way formations usually did, not with sudden panic, not with disorder, but with intention. The outer bombers edged outward as if opening a curtain. Inner ships angled ever so slightly. The firing fields overlapped. Every turret turned. Before a single fighter fired a shot, the fortresses were already ready. Voss dove anyway. Pride demanded it. He was met with a net of .50 caliber fire so dense it felt like flying into hail. He dodged one stream, then another, but the system was reading his angle, calculating. He fired once, missed. Then his wingman vanished. Just gone, an explosion, then only smoke. Voss rolled away hard. His canopy cracked. A round pierced the engine cowling. He banked out, diving into cloud. It was the only reason he survived. He landed back at the field and walked away from the plane. Didn't even wait for the ladder. He didn't look anyone in the eye. There was nothing left to say. The fortresses weren't machines anymore. They were an environment, a storm system. And the Reich had no shelter. At Allied command in England, the tone had changed too. The generals no longer talked in terms of raids. They talked in terms of mapping coverage, behavioral loops, counter-interdiction windows. The fortresses were just platforms now, flying nodes, in a constantly shifting net of data. If one node died, the net rerouted. If one position failed, the rest adjusted. No one saw it happen, but everyone felt it. Every new mission ran smoother. Every defensive kill came quicker. Gunners began calling out less. There was less to say. The system was faster than the human mind. Rayner had been rotated out by then. His tour completed. He watched the missions from the ground now, saw the squadrons rise over the runways and disappear into the sky. He still visited the hangars, still ran his fingers along the worn rivets of the fuselage. He never forgot what it felt like, the moment a system knew more than he did. He remembered Schweinfurt, remembered when it was just rumors, a box under the floor, a green light blinking. Now every fortress carried it. And every fortress was more than just a bomber. They were part of something else, something alive. The Germans would later say they lost the war when the Allies cracked their codes, when the tanks rolled across Normandy, when the V-2 rockets failed to cripple London. But some of them, the ones who saw the sky burn, would say otherwise. They'd say the war was lost the day the bombers began to think. Because from that day on, no pilot, no gun, no storm of flak could turn them back. You could shoot down a plane, but you couldn't shoot down the swarm. And no one saw it coming. Not until it was already too late.